There is a particular kind of quiet that lives inside you when you notice the things other people walk past, the shift in someone's voice, the pause before a sentence, the way a room feels different the moment someone leaves it. You have always carried this. Maybe you've never known what to call it. Perhaps you've felt this your whole life without language for it, the sense that you are tuned to a frequency most people aren't even aware exists. You catch the tightening around someone's eyes before they say, "I'm fine." You notice when a friend's laugh arrives half a second too late, like it had to be fetched from somewhere far away. Not paranoia, just perception. You are not suspicious of the world, you are simply listening to it more closely than most people remember how to. This is not a small thing, even though it often feels invisible. Highly observant people live in a layer of reality that hums just beneath the surface most people are walking on. While others see a conversation, you see the architecture beneath it, the hesitation, the subtext, the small contradiction between what someone says and what their body just did. It can feel lonely. Not because you're isolated, but because you're seeing something nobody else seems to be seeing with you. There's a term in psychology called sensory processing sensitivity, and it describes something close to what you might recognize in yourself. It means your nervous system takes in more sound, more emotional nuance, more subtle shifts in your environment, and processes it more deeply than the average brain is built to. It's not a flaw. It's a different operating system. Your senses simply let in more of the world, and your mind insists on making meaning out of all of it. This depth of processing often begins long before you understood it as a trait. Maybe it started in childhood, in a house where moods could shift without warning, where you learned, quietly, instinctively, to read a room before you even understood why you needed to. Not because you were anxious, because you were adapting. Children who grow up needing to predict the emotional weather around them often become adults who can sense a shift in someone's energy from the doorway. Not magic, memory. Your body remembers what it once needed to survive. This is where attachment theory enters gently, almost like a hand on your shoulder. The way you were cared for, watched over, or left to interpret silence on your own, it shaped the lens you see the world through now. If you grew up having to anticipate someone else's mood to feel safe, you likely became fluent in the unspoken. Not fluent because you wanted to be, fluent because you had to be, and that fluency never fully leaves you. It just relocates into friendships, into relationships, into the way you scan a new room within seconds of entering it. There's something tender hidden inside all of this, something easy to miss if you only look at the exhaustion of it. Yes, it's tiring to notice everything. Yes, your mind rarely gets to rest in the in-between spaces other people seem to glide through so easily. But underneath the tiredness is a kind of devotion to truth, to nuance, to the quiet architecture of human connection. You don't observe because you're detached from the world. You observe because you love it carefully, not loudly, carefully. Maybe you've wondered in the privacy of your own mind whether something is wrong with you for noticing so much. Whether other people are simply better at not caring, while you sit there absorbing every micro-expression like it matters more than it should. It doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means your brain has a wider lens, and a wider lens always lets in more light, and more light means more shadows too. Both arrive together. You don't get one without the other. There is a psychological idea called locus of control, and it explains something quietly profound about people who notice everything. When you have an internal locus of control, you believe your actions and observations actually shape your outcomes. You are not simply reacting to life, you are reading it, adjusting to it, making sense of it before it makes a mess of you. Highly observant people often develop a strong internal locus of control, not because they crave power, but because noticing has always felt safer than being caught off guard. Not control as domination. Control as preparation, not fear, just foresight wearing a quieter name. And yet, this same gift can sometimes feel like a burden you never asked to be handed. You notice the friend who is pulling away weeks before they admit it to themselves. You notice the tension in a relationship long before an argument finally breaks the surface. It's an odd kind of grief, to feel something coming and not be believed until it arrives. Not bitterness, just the quiet ache of being early to a truth nobody else is ready to face yet. There's a reason your mind works this way on a neurological level, and it isn't random. The amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for detecting emotional significance and potential threat, tends to be more reactive in highly sensitive, highly observant people. It's not that you're anxious by nature. It's that your internal alarm system is finely tuned, picking up signals most brains filter out before they ever reach conscious thought. Not overreacting, overhearing. Your mind hears frequencies that others' minds quietly mute. But here is something gentle worth sitting with. Noticing everything does not mean carrying everything. You can absorb the emotional temperature of a room without becoming responsible for fixing it. You can sense someone's sadness without owning it as your own. This is the quiet work many observant people eventually have to learn, not to numb the noticing, but to soften the way they hold what they notice. Not detachment, discernment. There is a difference even if it took you years to feel it. Maybe you've also felt the particular ache of being misunderstood by people who move faster than you do, people who skim relationships the way some people skim books, missing the footnotes, missing the parts written in smaller font. You read the footnotes, you always have. And sometimes that makes you feel like you're speaking a slightly different emotional language than everyone around you. Not because you're too much, because you're tuned finer. There's a quiet psychological phenomenon called cognitive dissonance that highly observant people brush against more often than most. It's the discomfort that arises when something someone says clashes with something their actions or expression quietly reveal. You feel that gap before you can even explain it logically, the mismatch between words and truth. It can be disorienting, sensing a contradiction nobody else seems to register. Not confusion. Clarity arriving too early for comfort. This is perhaps one of the loneliest parts of being deeply observant, knowing something is true before you have proof, before anyone else can see it, before the world catches up to what you already sensed in your body. Have you ever known something was wrong in a relationship or a friendship long before anything visibly changed? That quiet, internal certainty, the one nobody else can verify yet, is one of the heaviest gifts a perceptive mind carries. And still, there's something profoundly beautiful hidden in all of this depth, something that's easy to overlook when you're tired from carrying it. Highly observant people often experience moments of connection that others simply cannot access, a shared glance that says more than a paragraph could, a silence between two people that feels less like absence and more like intimacy. Not loneliness, intimacy. The kind that doesn't need words because it was never about words to begin with. There's a concept called theory of mind, which describes our ability to understand that other people have thoughts, feelings, and perspectives different from our own. Most people develop a basic version of this early in life, but highly observant individuals often develop an almost advanced form of it, sensing not just that someone feels differently, but how, and sometimes even why. It's like being handed an extra sense organ for understanding humanity. Not psychic. Practiced, you've simply rehearsed empathy more than most people ever had reason to. This is why so many observant people make others feel deeply seen, sometimes for the first time in their lives. You ask the question beneath the question. You notice the tremor in someone's voice when they insist they're okay. People are drawn to this kind of attention without always knowing why, because in a world that often listens only enough to respond, you listen enough to understand. Not performance, presence. The rarest gift in a distracted world. But presence like this comes at a cost, and it's worth naming gently instead of glossing over. Hypervigilance, when your nervous system stays on alert even in safe environments, can quietly drain you in ways that aren't always visible from the outside. You might seem calm in a room while internally tracking 6 different emotional signals at once. Not relaxation. Vigilance disguised as composure. It's exhausting to be the quiet anchor in spaces where everyone assumes you're simply unaffected. Maybe this is why solitude feels less like loneliness to you and more like restoration. When you finally close the door and the noise of other people's emotional weather fades, something in your chest can finally exhale. Not isolation, recovery. Your nervous system isn't avoiding people, it's recalibrating from absorbing so much of them. There's a particular kind of peace in the hum of a quiet room after a day of reading everyone else's unspoken language. Not emptiness, integration. There's also a quieter biological layer to all of this worth understanding without judgment. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter often associated with reward and motivation, plays an interesting role in observant minds. For some people, novelty and stimulation create a dopamine rush that pulls them toward more noise, more input, more action. For deeply observant people, the reward often comes not from more stimulation, but from accurate understanding, the quiet satisfaction of having read a situation correctly. Not excitement-seeking, truth-seeking. Your nervous system finds its reward in clarity, not chaos. This also explains why surface-level conversation can feel almost unbearable at times, not because you're judging the people having it, but because your mind is wired to crave depth the way other minds crave novelty. Small talk can feel like static to someone built for signal, not arrogance, just a different appetite. You're not above connection, you're hungry for the kind that actually nourishes you. There's an idea in psychology about interoception, your ability to sense what's happening inside your own body, the subtle signals of tension, unease, calm, or instinct. Highly observant people often have heightened introspection too, which means you don't just read other people closely, you read yourself closely as well. That tightness in your stomach before a decision, that instinctive pull toward or away from someone, not overthinking, inner listening. You've simply learned to trust the quiet data your body has been collecting all along. Have you ever made a decision that felt instantly right, almost before your mind could explain why? That's often this same skill turned inward, pattern recognition built from years of noticing subtle cues, applied not to someone else's behavior but to your own internal compass. Not luck, practice. You've been training this instinct since long before you knew it had a name. Of course, this depth of perception can sometimes turn against you, especially in moments of self-doubt. You might replay a conversation for hours, parsing every word for hidden meaning, wondering if you misread something or overanalyzed a glance that meant nothing at all. This isn't weakness. It's the cost of a mind that refuses to accept things at face value, not paranoia. Precision turned inward sometimes too sharply. It helps gently to remember that not every signal needs decoding, not every silence is a message. Sometimes a pause is just a pause, and a tired expression is just tiredness, with nothing more beneath it waiting to be uncovered. Learning this distinction is part of the quiet maturity that often comes with age for deeply observant people. Not the loss of perception, but the wisdom to know when to set it down. Not surrender, rest. There's a particular kind of grief, too, in being the one who always notices, especially in relationships where your perception isn't matched by someone else's attention. You might find yourself remembering the smallest details of someone's day while they forget you mentioned anything at all. It's not that they don't care, it's that their mind isn't built or trained to hold detail the way yours instinctively does. Not betrayal, difference, though it can feel achingly similar in the moment. This is perhaps why highly observant people often seek relationships with a particular kind of safety. Not excitement, not unpredictability, but a steady emotional honesty that doesn't require constant decoding. You're not drawn to people who are easy to read because you're lazy. You're drawn to them because for once you get to rest your interpretive mind and simply exist in the moment without translating it first. Not boredom, relief, a homecoming disguised as simplicity. And maybe that's the quiet thread running through all of this, that observation at its core isn't really about watching the world from a distance. It's about wanting to understand it closely enough to belong to it more fully. You don't notice everything because you want to stand apart. You notice because some part of you has always longed to truly understand the people and moments passing through your life, rather than letting them blur past unexamined. Not detachment, devotion expressed quietly. There's a kind of sacred attentiveness in this, even if no one ever named it that to you growing up. To notice the way someone's voice softens when they talk about something they love. To catch the flicker of relief when someone finally feels safe enough to be honest. These aren't small things. They are the unfiltered moments most people miss entirely, too busy waiting for their turn to speak. You are not just watching life happen, you are witnessing it fully the way it was meant to be witnessed. Maybe this is why being deeply seen by someone else can feel so disarming when it finally happens to you, because you're so used to being the one doing the seeing. When someone notices the same subtle things in you that you notice in everyone else, something in your chest loosens in a way that's hard to explain. Not surprise, recognition, as if some long, quiet wait has finally ended. There's also something worth saying gently about the moments when your perceptiveness feels like too much for the people around you, when friends ask why you're overanalyzing, or when someone dismisses your read on a situation simply because they didn't see what you saw. This can plant a quiet seed of self-doubt, making you question a skill that has actually served you well for most of your life. But your perception was never meant to be validated by everyone. It was only ever meant to be trusted by you. Think about how often your first read on a person eventually turned out to be the most accurate one, even when it took months or years for everyone else to catch up. That instinct was never random. It was data, gathered quietly, processed faster than language could keep up with. Not magic, pattern recognition built from a lifetime of paying closer attention than the world expected you to. Perhaps the deepest peace available to someone like you isn't in noticing less. That's not really possible, and trying to suppress it usually only creates more internal noise. The peace comes from trusting what you notice gently without needing external proof to validate your own perception every single time. Not arrogance, self-trust. The quiet confidence of someone who has been right more often than they've been given credit for. There's a strange comfort in accepting that you will likely always carry this depth of perception with you in every room you enter, every relationship you build, Every quiet moment that other people walk straight through without a second glance. It's not a burden to escape. It's a way of moving through the world that, with enough self-compassion, becomes less exhausting and more like home. Not a curse. A compass that's been guiding you longer than you realized. And maybe that's worth sitting with for a moment, not as a problem to solve, but as a quiet truth to finally exhale into. You were never too sensitive, too aware, too much in a world that often rewards people for noticing less. You were simply built to hold more of the world inside you than most people are willing to carry. Not a flaw in the design. The design itself quietly finally making sense. There is a kind of stillness that eventually arrives for people who spend their whole lives noticing. Not the stillness of numbness, but the stillness of finally trusting what you've always known without needing anyone else to confirm it first. The world will keep moving fast around you, missing things, rushing past the quiet details that make a life feel real. And you will keep noticing, gently, the way you always have, not because you have to, but because some part of you was simply built to carry the world a little more closely than most people ever learn to.